So today we are going to read pages 150 to page 157. We're picking up, of course, where we left off yesterday, where a lot of action occurred. There was a lot that went on yesterday. To start with, Esperanza was responsible for taking care of the babies and preparing dinner for everybody all by herself. And of course, things didn't exactly go as planned. She made some mistakes, fed the babies some raw plums, remember, and they got stomach aches and had terrible, terrible diapers that she had to deal with. And in the meantime, she burned the dinner. But we did notice that no one mentioned those mistakes to Esperanza. They knew that she had done her best. She had tried hard, and they know that she's learning from her mistakes and that this is all new for her. But she was exhausted and went to bed early that night. And then also, we know that a strike has been planned for the workers for quite some time because of the tough living conditions and the tough working conditions for some of the workers. And this is very stressful for Esperanza because she knows that she and Mama can't afford to strike. They need to work so that they can get the money to get Abuelita to the camp with them. And so she is glad that the people in her camp are not planning to strike. Although, in talking with others, she's beginning to understand and sympathize a bit with those who do want to strike. She understands that viewpoint, but she, of course, knows that she can't afford to strike. Now, on the day that the strike was supposed to take place, everybody went on to work or school, leaving Esperanza with the babies and with the neighbors, Irene and Melina. And a terrible dust storm rolled in. And it hit the entire area for miles and miles. The air was filled with this swirling dust, and it was pushed by these heavy winds. And it was hard to see. It was hard to breathe. The dust was covering everything. And Esperanza, of course, was very worried about all of her friends and family. Could they even breathe out in that stuff? And when the wind settled down a little bit and the dust was still swirling in the air, Irene and Melina left Esperanza. They covered themselves with a quilt or something, and they took Melina's baby and they ran for their cabin. And that is where we left off and where we'll pick up now. Esperanza waited, nervously pacing the room and worrying about the others. The school bus came first. Isabel burst into the cabin, crying, "Mi gata, Chiquita!" Esperanza hugged her. Of course, the gata is the cat. Esperanza hugged her and said, "She is fine, but very dirty and hiding under the bed. Are you all right?" "Yes," said Isabel. "We got to sit in the cafeteria all afternoon and play games with erasers on our heads, but I was worried about Chiquita." The door opened again and Mama walked into the cabin, her skin covered with an eerie brown chalkiness and her hair dusted like the cat's fur. "Oh, Mama!" "I am fine, mija," she said, coughing. Hortensia and Josephina followed, and Isabel put her hands on her cheeks in worried surprise. You look like raccoons," she said. All of their faces had circles of pink around their eyes where they had squinted against the dust. "The trucks could not find their way to the shed, so all we could do was sit and wait," said Hortensia. "We hid behind some crates and buried our heads, but it did not help much." Josephina took the babies next door, and Mama and Hortensia began washing their arms in the sink, making muddy water. Mama continued to cough. "What about Alfonso and Juan and Miguel?" asked Esperanza. "If the trucks could not get to us, they could not get to the fields. We'll have to wait," said Hortensia, exchanging a worried look with Mama. A few hours later, Juan, Alfonso, and Miguel arrived, their clothes stiff and brown, all of them coughing and clearing their throats every few minutes. Their faces were so encrusted with dry dirt that they reminded Esperanza of cracked pottery. They took turns rinsing in the sink, the pile of brown clothes growing in the basket. When Esperanza looked outside, she could almost see the trees, but the dust was still thick in the air. Mama had a coughing spasm, and Hortensia tried to settle her with a glass of water. When the adults all finally sat down at the table, Esperanza asked, "What happened with the strike?" "There was no strike," said Alfonso. We heard that they were all ready and that there were hundreds of them. They had their signs, but the storm hit. The cotton is next to the ground, and the fields are now buried in dirt and cannot be picked. Tomorrow they will have no jobs because of an act of God. You know, an act of God is something that happens in nature. It's something that people don't control, things like storms and volcanic eruptions and things like that. So this dust storm is an act of God. What will we do tomorrow? Asked Esperanza. Well, the grapes are higher off the ground, said Alfonso. The trunks of the vines are covered, but the fruit was not affected. The grapes are ready and cannot wait, so mañana we will go back to work. Now, I know this makes Esperanza happy in the way that she knows that they need to work. They need the money, and so she is glad that they'll be able to work. The next morning, the sky was blue and calm, and the dust had left the air. It had settled on the world, covering everything like a suede blanket. Everyone who lived at the camp shook out the powdery soil, went back to work, and came home again as if nothing had happened. In a week, they finished cutting the grapes. Then, while they finished packing the grapes, they were already talking about preparing for potatoes. The camp routine repeated itself like the regimented rows in the fields. Very little seemed to change, thought Esperanza, except the needs of the earth. And Mama had changed, because after the storm, she never stopped coughing. So it sounds like Mama must have inhaled some of this dust that was all in the air, and it may be in her lungs. She is having a hard time with this coughing. Mama, you're so pale, said Esperanza. This is page 153. Mama carefully walked into the cabin as if she were trying to keep her balance and slumped into a chair in the kitchen. Hortensia was bustling behind her. I'm going to make her some chicken soup with lots of garlic. She had to sit down at work today because she felt faint, but it's no wonder because she's not eating. Look at her. She's lost weight. She has not been herself since that storm, and that was a month ago. I think she should go to the doctor. Mama, listen to her, pleaded Esperanza. Mama looked at her weakly. I'm fine, just tired. I'm just not used to the work. And I've told you, doctors are very expensive. Page 154. Irene and Melina are coming over after dinner to crochet, said Esperanza. She thought that would cheer Mama up. You sit with them, said Mama. I'm going to lie down until the soup is ready, because I have a headache. And then after dinner, I'll go straight to bed and get a good rest. I'll be fine. She coughed, got up, and slowly walked from the room. Hortensia looked at Esperanza, shaking her head. A few hours later, Esperanza stood over Mama. Your soup is ready, Mama. But she didn't move. Mama, dinner, said Esperanza, reaching for her arm and gently shaking her. Mama's arm was burning. Her cheeks were flushed red, and she wasn't waking. Esperanza felt panic squeezing her, and she screamed, Hortensia! So Mama is very, very ill, and Esperanza is very worried. This is the bottom of page 154. The doctor came. He was American, light and blonde, but he spoke perfect Spanish. He looks very young to be a doctor, said Hortensia. He has come to the camp before and people trust him, said Irene, and there are not many doctors who will come out here. Alfonso, Juan, and Miguel sat on the front steps, waiting. Isabel sat on the mattress, her eyes worried. Esperanza could not sit still. She paced near the bedroom door, trying to hear what was going on inside. When the doctor finally came out, he looked grim. Grim means serious and worried. He walked over to the table where all the women sat. Esperanza followed him. The doctor signaled for the men and waited until everyone was inside. She has valley fever. Oh, what does that mean? Asked Esperanza. It's a disease of the lungs that is caused by dust spores. Sometimes when people move to this area and they aren't used to the air here, the dust spores get into their lungs and cause an infection. But we were all in this dust storm, said Alfonso. When you live in this valley, everyone inhales the dust spores at one time or another. Most of the time, the body can overcome the infection. Some people will have no symptoms at all. Some will feel like they have the flu for a few days, and others, for whatever reason, cannot fight the infection and get very sick. How sick? Asked Hortensia. Esperanza sat down. She may have a fever on and off for weeks, but you must try to keep it down. She will cough and have headaches and joint aches. She might get a rash. Can we catch it from her? The babies? Asked Josephina. No, said the doctor. It isn't contagious, and the babies and young children have probably had a mild form of it already without you even knowing. Once the body fights off the infection, it doesn't get it again. For those who live here most of their lives, they are naturally immunized. It is hardest on adults who move here and are not accustomed to the agricultural dust. How long until she is well? Asked Esperanza. The doctor's face looked tired. He ran his hand through his short blonde hair. There are some medicines she can take, but even then, if she survives, it might take months for her to get her full strength back. Esperanza felt Alfonso behind her, putting his hands on her shoulders. She felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted to tell the doctor that she could not lose Mama, too, that she had already lost Papa, and that Abuelita was too far away. Her voice strangled with fear. All she could do was whisper the doctor's uncertain words. If she survives. Now, I think this chapter has presented us with some very important scenes in Esperanza's life. We know that she is getting used to many new things in her new life. And as she grows and as she goes through these experiences that she's having, her voice, her narrative voice that we hear sort of in the background, starts to sound more and more like a grown woman than a child. Instead of worrying about her clothes and her dolls and that sort of thing, she starts focusing and taking care of the people in her life. There was a time when being dirty and getting dirty was one of her biggest concerns, but during the dust storm, all she was worried about was the safety of her family and friends. And now, of course, she's dealing with the fact that she's already lost her papa, Abuelita is yet to come, and Mama, who she has depended on all her life, Mama, who has helped her become accustomed to her new world and has helped her in all ways throughout her life, is now deathly ill. So, of course, she is very worried about the fact that with Mama so sick, she now is having to support herself and her Mama, in addition to all of the chores that she is learning to deal with. And we will pick up reading tomorrow on page 158.